Marty, be kind enough to start me off and tell me the story of Sean Parker.
Well, in summary, Sean Parker was a member of a family who was living in Dunmore, a small village in County Galway. And Sean was the youngest son, and he was born in Dunmore in 1935. And then soon afterwards, the family moved to Glensk, here in County Galway, not far from Roscommon town. And all was going well, I suppose, really, until Sean's mother died at the young age of 50. That was in 1945. And I think things started to go downhill after that, and the family moved away from Glensk in 1946. And indeed, little is known about the family throughout the years until news came to light that Sean had died at the age of 79 in the care of the Medway Council in Kent, in England.
How did that news come to you? What was the circumstance of you finding out?
Well, I think wonderful credit is due to the staff of the nursing home where Sean spent the latest years of his life, because they obviously treated him with great respect, and because they managed to find out a few snippets of information that made it possible for us to identify him. Basically, they found out his date of birth, and they had an idea that he came from the west of Ireland, possibly somewhere in Galway. And really, that was enough for us to identify him. And great credit also is due to Paul Edwards of the Medway Council in Kent, because he definitely went, I think, far beyond the call of duty and put him in the Galway Advertiser. Gradually, they put all of the pieces together and found that they believed, yes, this was our Sean Parker. And unless friends or family or relations were found, I think the spine-chilling thing about it really was that Sean would be placed in an unmarked grave.
Yes.
And that was really what the community here didn't want to happen to what they saw as one of our own, one person who had grown up here in our, a small rural community, who had gone to school here, who had friends here, and, had, strangely enough, after such a long passage of time, still had friends that remembered him and remembered his family.
And clearly he was remembering too, because he provided the necessary snippets of information that allowed contact to occur.
Yes, indeed. And, it's amazing in the memory of people, after so many years, the little details that will still be remembered. For example, one of the first things that people talked about was the fact that his father had lost the thumb of his left hand. And they were very clear on that. It was very specific. It wasn't one hand, it wasn't right or left. Very specific. The thumb was missing off his left hand. And I suppose it would maybe have been unusual for people in our area at that time maybe to have some disability of that nature. But they also remembered that the reason for that was that he had served in the British Army, he had served in the First World War, and as a result of his action there, that was how he lost his thumb. And indeed, that's an area we have to follow up on now and to research it further.
It's almost, as you talk, it almost seems to me as though it was meant that Sean Parker would come home.
It was meant, indeed. And one other story that was, I suppose a heartwarming story really, and we know very little about Sean Parker, but we know from this story, I think, that there was a streak of kindness in his heart, because when he left Glensk in 1946 at the age of 11, he had, as you can imagine, his family were very poor, and like all the neighbours were at the same time, I hasten to add, and economic circumstances at the time in our area were quite poor. But Sean had one treasured possession, and that was a little rusty terrier that he gave the name Terry to. And he wanted to make sure when he was going away that little dog would be cared for. The little dog, Mrs. Grady, who lived nearby. And, it's hard to imagine this 11-year-old boy cuddling that little terrier in his arms as he walked in the little boy's house, and with tears in his eyes, he passed on that terrier to the Grady household, and indeed they looked after and cared for that little terrier for a number of years afterwards.
Marty, there is a great kindness, a great humanity in the hearts of the people of Glinsk. This is an icon for good behaviour in an angular and awkward and difficult modern world.
I think really that the measure, I suppose, or the barometer of a society is often in how they treat their elderly people or their senior citizens, and how they treat maybe the people who have gone away and people who have fallen on hard times. And we cannot change the life of Sean, but at least we have managed, to celebrate the memory of his life and given him a very a great tribute of a very community burial where all of the people turned out. That when in 1950, the funeral mass was in the church in Glensk. There was no hearse.
The same mass, yeah. The same church as his mummy was buried from all those years ago.
That's right, and there was no hearse to bring her to the graveyard. But the men of Glensk at the time stood forward and carried that coffin to the graveyard. And, I think in an amazing tribute to measure of how she was held in high esteem in the community. And, it was like history repeating itself that her son, the body of the coffin of Sean, was carried shoulder high by the people of Glensk.
What kind of people are you in Glinsk? This story has gone out across the island and across these islands and even wider into the greater Europe. You are a remarkable enough people.
Yes, indeed. I think it's a community where there is wonderful community spirit, where over the years people have worked together, and I think there always has, in all of the organisations and societies in the Glinsk area, there always has been a vision of trying to build a better community, of trying to build a better place in which our young people can live, and that has always been the sort of the motto of the people. Our motto in the Irish language is Níneart go Corlekele, the life of Sean Parker, that brought out this tremendous outpouring of generosity, because from the moment Sean Parker's coffin and remains left Medway until it was laid to rest in the grave here in the graveyard, everybody concerned gave their services free of charge. From the person who dug the grave to the county council who gave the grave, to Aer Lingus, to Knock Airport, to undertakers on both sides of the Irish Sea. Sean may not have got great fame or glory in his life, but he surely got it in depth.
Isn't that?
I suppose we all leave an imprint on our communities and our environment as we pass through, and some people will be remembered for the wall they built or the tree they sowed. But Sean Parker will definitely leave an indelible mark on the minds of many people because of this power and the kindness and generosity that so many people were prepared to give to him in depth.
And coming at the end of what must have been a very, very difficult and traumatic life on the streets of London.
Yes, indeed. And I suppose it's hard to imagine. I'm sure that Sean's hands, as he came to the ends of his life, I'm sure they were frail and trembling in his last few years. And, who would have thought that those hands, so many hearts, and all of the community here in Glensk are delighted, that, as I say, that one of our own has laid to rest as close as possible to his mother. And indeed, the people who took part in the funeral mass were people who remembered Sean and his family. And there were tears in their eyes as they remembered that family. And it was a very emotional day. People travelled great distances here to the church in Glensk on the day of the funeral. I know a connection with Glensk here, no connection with the local community or with the story, but he obviously was somebody who had been affected by immigration, either himself or his family. He walked into the church early on. They looked at the photograph. He touched the coffin. He knelt down in silence and said a prayer, and then went on his way. The feeling of one could easily see the emotion, and I suppose it's really the whole story of immigration and the effects it has had on all of our people, that were etched on his face as he walked out of the church.
Marty Ward in Glinsk, you are a remarkable people, and thank you for talking to me this morning.
Thank you very much, Ron. God bless you.
God bless you, sir.